Welcome back. And now for our next session, we have a wonderful guest and a good friend of mine. His name is Ranjay Gulati. He's a professor from the Harvard Business School, and some say he's the CEO whisperer. Welcome to our Purpose Power Summit.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you for having me here today with you.
It's a pleasure. So, why don't we jump in? What, in your opinion, can purpose do for CEOs?
Purpose to me was, in some ways, like wallpaper. It was this thing that every company had, but no one did anything with. And I believe that too. It was like, oh, really, a mission statement, whatever. And I've come to realize what an underutilized resource. What an underutilized resource. It's such a fundamental, it's so simple, and yet it can be really so profound and deep in its impact on companies. Not only does it give you directional clarity, because it addressing the purpose forces you to think clearly about why are we here, what do we want to do, what do we not want to do. It also forces you to think about to get connected to the right kind of employees who want to work for you. There's a self-selection matching that happens. People come to you for the right reasons, not for a job, but for some affiliation with that purpose of yours. Your customers, you start to filter out your customers. Sure, you'll have may have fewer customers, but different customers, but ones that are much more loyal. And then, of course, it allows you to think about connecting to your community at large. I think the mistake we think of now in the modern version of purpose right now is purpose is a tax on doing business, and that is such a, I would say, incorrect, and I would say a myopic view of purpose.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like the simple is often avoided. If you're the CEO, you need something complicated to work with. What does purpose mean for employees?
Well, let's think about employees first for a second. First of all, we all have an individual level of purpose, which is what is my life purpose? Why am I here? Right? We all, and work is part of our life purpose. So, yes, and some of us decide our life purpose has nothing to do with work. Work is work. It's the segregated, bounded set of activity that has nothing to do with my life. I have a different purpose. Could be my family, my community, my organizations to which I belong, my hobbies. Could be anything. That's my real purpose. So there's a purpose we have, and then there is what you say the organization's purpose. And we are trying to find an intersection between these two kind of focal points in our lives and connect them in some meaningful way. And if you look at, for instance, what Satya Nadella and Kathleen Hogan at Microsoft have done, they've done a masterful job in trying to find a way to connect these two ideas. And in fact, they even say that, don't ask what you can do for Microsoft, but ask what can Microsoft do for you? We want you to live your life purpose.
Yeah.
And we want to support you in that journey.
That's quite a shift. I think that it's such a galvanizing power for employees to hear that from leaders. In your opinion, when CEOs that you talk to and you work with, when they think about purpose, do they think about how it can help change the company, transform the company, how it can change the mindsets of their employees or their employee habits? Is that how they're thinking about it?
Well, I think of course, the answer runs the gamut, right? There are those who kind of are on the more enlightened end of the spectrum where they really understood the potential of purpose. They see it as, not just a rallying cry, not just, but it's a galvanizing force and a way to change the organizing principle in your organization. How people think about work, how people think about their relationship to the work, how they think about their connection to the organization, to the customers, to community at large, and and it taps into, I would say, some really building an emotional connection to work, and that becomes kind of part of this whole story. Then,
How do you think purpose, all things being equal, competitive salary and benefits and Uh, you work for a great company. How important is purpose to attract great talent or even retain talent coming out of COVID?
So, look, I think we all know there hasn't been enough research on this topic yet. People have studied culture, which is, I would say, adjacent construct to purpose, but distinct. And they found people opt into cultures, but there's growing evidence that people actually opt into a purpose of an organization. But not everybody will opt in, right? So there's a self-selection matching going on. I'll just give you an example. I just wrote a case on a company called Livongo, and Livongo sold last year to Teladoc. But it was one of the fastest growing health tech companies for creating a platform for people with chronic disease, diabetes being the first, but also hypertension and others. Two-thirds of the people who chose to work at this company have a connection to diabetes and chronic illness, either in themselves or their family members, right? They were located in Silicon Valley, right down the road from Google and Facebook and others. They had no issues attracting top talent.
Hmm.
And without having to pay over market wages, people wanted to be there. Now, that's one thing, is to get the talent. The other question that I don't have an answer to is productivity. What do we know about productivity of people? And we know that, it's not just about satisfaction, it's about being inspired. And what does that do to our ability to focus and be more productive?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, clearly there's a deep passion for those that work at Livongo and connection to diabetes. We actually talked when you were having your clubhouse session with the founder, Glenn, and I asked the question of whether CEOs that are enlightened around purpose have experienced some form of suffering. And he thought that was a funny question.
There's a kernel of something you said there just now,
Hmm.
that to really make this idea of organizational purpose stick, there are two parts to it. One of us, you have to be convinced that it's going to help performance, right? Yes, we don't have the definitive study to nail that down, but we at least can anecdotally, logically piece together that it's likely to have a positive effect on performance. This is not purpose and performance go together. The other part that you just said was purpose is personal.
Hmm.
It's not an abstract idea. It has to be feel personal to the leader. I do this because it is meaningful to me. It's not just a concept that seems like a good strategy, so let's put it out there. It's an extension of who you are. And so great purpose leaders tell personal stories about why that purpose is meaningful to them.
Well, it's like Viktor Frankl, obviously, who went through the Second World War, was a concentration camp victim, and then came out of the war and searched for man's meaning. He sort of led that sort of thinking. There's definitely something connected to that. I mean, on that point, what was your eureka moment? When did you move from being not necessarily a naysayer, but you weren't particularly, let's say, convinced that purpose was empirically generating business results, to becoming a purpose-driven professor? What happened to you personally?
Several things. It's sort of like a intersection of a several set of things that happened to me. Um, you know, my students, I was teaching and chairing our advanced management program. We had the Boston bombing over here. The students got together. They did a whole kind of a fundraising for the victims of that tragedy. They raised, $150,000 in like 2 days, and they had their own companies contribute. But this led to a larger conversation around like, what is the role of business in society?
Hmm.
And as we think about role of business in society, you can ask that question naturally to the question of what is our purpose? Why are we here? And I was completely ill-equipped to answer this question. I was like, why are we having this conversation? You want to talk about CSR? Sure, let's talk about CSR. And every company should be doing CSR and I was working on a book on sustainability, and I kind of sort of got it. But I hadn't stepped back to ask the existential question that this is perhaps a delivery system to get an organization to really engage with this community, with society, with thinking long-term value. The delivery system was through this concept called purpose. And then I started piecing it together. I then started looking at a bunch of small companies. And I wrote an article called The Soul of a Startup, because some of them would lament the loss of their youth, like, oh my God, we lost the old days, a lot of nostalgia. And I was asked them, what did you lose? What's lost? Well, the informality, the casual culture, this, the that. And it took me a while to get my head around the idea that they were talking about something else also. This purposeful orientation among the team, that we are here to do something bigger, ambitious, change something in the world. And somehow that ambition, collective ambition and excitement around it gets lost. And then it just suddenly turns into I'm doing a job. And I have to say to you, this is not a new idea. The genesis of this goes back actually to the early part of the 1900s. There was a professor at actually Harvard Business School named Chester Barnard, who wrote a book called The Function of the Executive. And then in the 50s and 60s, there was another gentleman named Philip Selznick, who also talked about the role of a leader. And at that time, they were looking at this idea from the lens of what is a leader's job. And they said a leader's job is to infuse meaning into what people are doing, because your job is to energize people to want to work. And you got to infuse meaning into what they do, because when you do that, they will engage in a way that is different. And this somehow got lost. We kind of went down this path of shareholder value. We started talking about other things, and a very core idea and work also. And now you see some really interesting work on job crafting and conversations about how there are people who will experience their work more as a calling than a job. And I think I think we're at the cusp of something that is going to actually change in a lot of businesses. That's my hope.
I look forward to that. One last question I have for you. You may not want to answer, but I know secretly you're working on a new book. I don't know if you want to mention kind of what you're thinking about.
Yeah. So my book, which is hopefully coming out by the end of the early next year, published by HarperCollins, and I'm really excited about it. It's taken me 2 years. I interviewed over 200 people at over 20 companies, and it turned out to be both, I would say, inspiring and daunting. It was really inspiring to hear great stories of companies and how they have balanced an idealism with realism, how they've had to navigate trade-offs and choices, how they've thought about this problem and tried. So that's the first part of it. It was really inspiring to hear their stories about how they've thought about this in really expansive ways. One of them being Anand Mahindra at Mahindra and Mahindra, but Josh Silverstein at Etsy, and I can go on and on about company after company. Viraj Puri at Gotham Green, Satya Nadella at Microsoft. So small and large companies. But it was also daunting to hear how hard it is. As you said earlier, sometimes simple things can be really hard.
Absolutely.
So my book is to design, I hope, to share the inspiring message, but also to unpack how this work they do can be daunting, but there are ways to understand and learn from them, and hopefully inspire others to follow.
I love that balance of business idea with business idealism. Really brilliant. Well, for all of you who are participating today, I strongly recommend that you follow Ranjay Gulati on LinkedIn and keep your eyes open for his new book, which I'm sure will be an eye-opener. Ranjay, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a truly inspiring and illuminating session. Really fun to see you again.
Thank you, Scott. Great to see you. And I wish all of you the very best. And thanks again. Looking forward to continued conversations with you soon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.